All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott coming at you with JavaScript courtesy of Murox JavaScript 2nd edition. We are now on Chapter 2, getting started with JavaScript. All right, and remember, if you've never heard this saying before, sometimes you have to learn to crawl before you can learn to walk, before you can learn to run. Well, they're going to show you some stuff in this chapter that although it'll work, it's not the recommended way of doing things. So we're going to learn some stuff in here, for lack of better words, that we're almost going to have to unlearn a little bit later. And if you don't know what I mean, you will as we go on. All right. Given the specs for a JavaScript app, code, test, and debug an app. Describe 2 ways to include JavaScript in the head of an HTML document. Describe how JavaScript can be included in the body of an HTML document. Describe how case sensitivity, semicolons, white space relate to the syntax for a JavaScript statement. List the primary rules for creating a JavaScript identifier. Describe the use of JavaScript comments, including commenting out portions of JavaScript code. Describe the syntax for referring to a method or property of an object. Describe the use of the prompt, alert, write, and writeLine methods. Describe the 3 primitive data types used in JavaScript, in other words, numeric, string, and Boolean. Describe the use of the arithmetic operators and the rules for evaluating an arithmetic expression. Describe the use of variable declarations and assignment statements with numeric, string, and Boolean data. Describe the use of the plus operator and the \n escape sequence when working with strings. Describe the use of Parse Int and Parse Float. All right, before we even start, just give you a little bit of, I don't even know, background isn't the right word, but just tell you a quick little story, all right? Years ago, I had a friend who was in a band, and every once in a while, I would go out and listen to him. He was one of the guitarists in the band. And it didn't happen to him, but one night, I noticed that with one of the guitar players, during the middle of one of the songs, a string broke. All right, so he changed the way he was playing, etc. Did it sound different? I guess I didn't at that time, didn't have probably a good enough musical ear where I could really tell. All right, but I talked to him and I talked to the guitarist whose string broke during the break. And I said, geez, has that ever happened to you before? And they said, yeah. And they said, sometimes too, we'll play a song and for whatever reason, I'll just kind of space out. And I'll kind of forget what chords to play, or I'll misplay something. And I said, geez, what do you do? And he said, well, you know, when you're playing in a rock band, you can turn the amps up. And a lot of times, if you make mistakes, people can't tell because it's so darn loud anyway. And he said, whereas if I was playing a folk guitar and it didn't have any kind of amplifier for it, and I didn't have a group with me and I was playing by myself, and I chunked the note, I mishit it or whatever, everybody could tell. So what does this have to do with what we're doing right now? Well, JavaScript is kind of like playing the electric guitar, because if you forget to do things, JavaScript will normally do them for you, and more than 99 times out of 100, if you forget to do something and JavaScript does it for you, it does what you wanted it to do. All right. In some ways, JavaScript is the ideal first language to learn because it's so forgiving. And in other ways, JavaScript is one of the worst, just absolutely one of the worst languages to learn because it's so forgiving. So let's say that what I want to do, all right, is, and I'm going to keep this even easier than they do it in the book. So I'm going to create something here. And just so you see it, in the book, this is what we're going to be doing in Chapter 2. I'm producing the last one I just created. But in the book, this is what they do for Chapter 2. There's a miles per gallon program where it says enter miles driven, 444. Enter gallons used, 22. 22. So your mileage per gallon was 20. Okay? Thank you for using our program. Then there's another one that's very similar to it. It asks you to enter 3 test scores, 77, 88, and 92. So your average was an 85. That should be pretty obvious what's going on in there. But you'll notice there's only one file. There's no CSS. There is no special JavaScript file. There is just this file. All right? So, in fact, rather than me doing it, let's take a look at both of those files. That's maybe even a better idea. So we'll start with the scores program. Okay, so we've got HTML, HTML, HTML to right here. Now we're kind of breaking the rules, because in here, what we've done is we use what's called a script tag, which starts here and it ends there. And we're just throwing all or most of our JavaScript. There's where it's telling us to enter the 3 test scores. Okay, so we're just throwing it right into our HTML. And then we're doing the average, all into our HTML. That's not really a good way to do things. And then we're even writing it out here with script tags. So what I want to do is I want to take this program right here that you see in front of you, and I want to rewrite it. So in other words, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab all of this stuff that's in this script tag here and cut it and put it in a new file. And since it's in a new file, I no longer need the script tags. All right? But let's see. This is going to look ugly for a second, but I want to get rid of all this white space. All right, so I can move that stuff over as I feel the need to. Okay, I don't need that bottom script tag. So I've just moved all that stuff. Okay, now I'm also going to go and grab all of that stuff that was at the bottom, this, and I'm going to remove that. All right, and I'm going to put that into the same file. Oops. I'm going to put that into the same file that I was just working in right here. All right, don't worry about that file for a second, but right now all I have in here is a title and thanks for using the test scores application. So if I grab this now, and I'm going to save this as, and instead of scores, I'm going to call this scores 2. But if I run scores 2, that's all it does. And there's no CSS with it. So there's nothing. Just thanks for using it. Okay? And that's fine. But what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to add a button. Input type equal button. I'm telling it I'm putting a button in here. On click, so it means when I click the button, I want to call main. You say, what's main? I'm going to show it to you in just a minute. All right. How did I change this? Let's put a couple, put in about 3 BR tags here. All right. So how did I change this? Or did I change it? Well, now there's a button. It's not showing for some reason, but there's a button. All right, so what is the problem? Input type equal button, on click equal main. Oh, let's put each one of these on its own line so we can really tell what's going on here. So we'll say, remember, ID equals, we'll just call it run. It's kind of a silly name, but it's fine. Name equals run, and value equals run. Okay, whoops. Now does it look any nicer? There's run. Okay? It's not doing anything yet, and that's okay. All right, but we've got all that stuff in there. Now, what I want to do is go back to, and I have to tell the system here, script tag, and I'm saying I want to include a file. Before we learn how to use the link tag to include a CSS file, this is the script tag to include a JavaScript file. So I'm saying source equals, and we'll call it testscores.js. All right, then I have to close my script tag. Okay? So this is going to have to be saved then, and we're going to have to save it as testscores.js. All right, so there's a bunch of stuff in here now, but I don't even care about it yet. I don't even want to run any of this. I want to just see if my file right now, if it works. So I'm commenting out everything in my file, and I'm going to put in what's called a JavaScript Alert Box, where I say alert, and I'm going to say in here, I'm I'm in testscores.js. I'm going to run this, and guess what? It isn't going to work. Click run, nothing happens. Why? Because remember the code that was in here. Remember our HTML code. It said when we click our button, we want to run something called main. We don't have a main. So I've got to come in here and create a function. And a function is just a bunch of related code. Function main. And now I'm going to grab that alert and I'm going to put it inside of main here. So now let's see if it comes and says I'm in test score. I'm in the main function in testscores.js. So now let's see what happens. Still didn't work. The answer is always in the code, so we'll go back and look. Function main, boom, boom, alert. I'm in the main function in testscores.js. To me, that looks like it's okay. What I'm going to do for a second is I'm just going to remove all of that. And we'll even throw it into another file. Okay? So we've got function main, boom, boom, alert. I'm in the main function in testscores.js. That looks like it should work to me. But it's not. Okay, let's look at possible problems and possible reasons that happen. Testscores.js, we're telling it to call testscores.js, so that's good. And it should be that, and I can stop this, sorry. That's the production of the previous video that I did. We've got testscores.js and we've got scores2, they're together, that's good. So why wouldn't this be working? Input, type equal button. On click, it could be this, but I don't think it's that. But let me check. Whoops. Oh, crud. Save as. All right. Okay, doc type, HTML head, meta, title, script, source equals test scores, script, should be fine, script, beginning and end tags, head, body, HTML, input, end of input. On click is main. Name, ID is run, name is run. Oh, I think I know what the problem is. All right, I could be wrong. Sorry, my daughter just texted me. And I am texting her back. Okay. I think it's because I used the same ID and I used that. Well, that wouldn't be right. Input type equal button. On click equal main. ID is run. Name is run. Value is run. That actually should be okay. Okay, it was because for the on-click, I had this a lowercase c. See, when it's a lowercase c like this, watch, with it's a little c, and I run it. Now it doesn't, well, I guess now it works that way too. That's nice. All right, I don't know what the problem was, but it's been fixed. So I'm telling it here, when I click the button, I want the function that's called main to run. All right, and main is right here, and right now it's not doing very much. So I'm going to grab all that code that we had previously, And there's a lot of code, way too much probably to put in one function, but it's still okay. All right, whoops. And I'm going to paste that back into my testscores.js. I'm going to put it right there and pretty it up a little, so give me a minute to pretty it up. One thing I don't like about what they did here, which is but it's fine. I'm going to put in here .toFixed 2. I'm going to try to put that into 2 decimal places. All right, so what I have done now is I have taken all that code that we had in our HTML file and I put it into its own file. Then in the HTML file, I referenced that. Okay, so let's see. Hold on. Yeah, cancel. I'm trying to cancel you. All right, so I don't need this file anymore. I think that's why it was giving me the error. All right, so now let's run it and see if it still works. Run. Test score 1, 33. Test score 2, 44, 55. Test score 3, 99. Still works. Not a problem. But what I did was, rather than putting all of our code together like they have here, which, as I told you, is wherever it is, the one that's right here, our original scores. Rather than putting all of that JavaScript here and here right inside of our application, all right, I instead put it in its own file. All right, that's what I just showed you is the crux of this chapter. So jump back. We're here. So if I use the source statement, as you saw, when I wanted to add this, I said source equals. It used to be you had to also say type equals text / JavaScript to let it know that it was a JavaScript file. You can still do that today. It does not hurt anything. But that's considered old school, and most people don't do it that way anymore. You can, though. If you want to, you can still add it, but you don't have to. You'll notice that with that in there, if I go back and run the program, still going to run the same. Still works. Okay. All right. So what I'm telling you here is that the source, that line right there that says source in it, that specifies the location of the external JavaScript file. The type, you can put in type equals text / JavaScript. I think that's what's called the MIME type. It's basically sending a signal to the system over what kind of file it is. So what the book showed was internal or embedded JavaScript when it's inside of your HTML file. What I showed you was I rewrote that as external JavaScript. All right. Now, there is some disagreement among people who work in the biz as to whether you should take this line of code right there and put it here, or whether you should put it down here. You might say, well, why does that even matter? It matters for this reason. If I put it here, then that file is loaded in with the head. And as you probably know, the head of a document gets loaded before the body because the head appears before the body. If I take this line and put it down here, then I can be 100% sure that my entire body has loaded before that line gets loaded. So if I take this and put it down here, it's not going to, the program will still work. All right? And it'll still run exactly the same way. You know what? I'm going to make this here say run program, just so you see that. Okay? All right. So run program, boom. There's my scores. 77, 88, 90. Boom. Still works. Now, the reason I'm going and telling you about this is later in the course we talk about jQuery, which is a JavaScript library. And the recommendation is that you put all script tags, and this is a script tag, down in the body. But not everybody, there's not universal agreement over that, okay? So here's an example of a script tag. I showed you my own. All right, so here's the head where we embedded or put the JavaScript right in the program itself. As I mentioned, I just showed you an external JavaScript file. The book does this chapter using embedded JavaScript. Okay? You can put JavaScript in here and embed it right in your HTML, but it'll work if you do this. It'll look like this. In fact, if I grab this one here, and I'll just create a brand new file just so you can see it. All right. And we'll see if we get come on, that output when we get done. All right, so I'm going to create a new program here. Doc type HTML, put in all the usual things, head. Oops, I need HTML. Well, I need HTML in there first. Head, I'll just leave a blank title in here, which is bad practice, but I just want to throw this stuff here. How about here it is? Example. If you don't know this already, what you put in here is what appears in the tab up here when you run it. You'll see that in a second. All right, finish the head, body, so that's the body end tag. The other one's the body begin tag. My ending HTML tag, and let's paste that in. All right, pretty it up just a tad. And you can see what we're doing here is we are putting JavaScript right inside of a paragraph. All right? And right inside of another paragraph. Again, most people would tell you that they wouldn't recommend that you do it that way. And I'm going to save this as townhall.html. This is the San Joaquin Town Hall. When I run it, it works. Now you might look at it and go, well, yeah, it works, but it doesn't look nice like the one in the book did. Well, they just put a box around it. Okay? All right. Sometimes people turn off JavaScript because they hear from somebody else, all right, that JavaScript is evil. You shouldn't have JavaScript. You can manually go in and turn JavaScript off. The recommendation is that you don't, but you can do that. If you turn it off, you can put in what's called a no script tag, which says if the person is running JavaScript or if they have JavaScript disabled on their browser, that's what will print instead. So this 2015 that's right here will only print if this doesn't work, if JavaScript is disabled. Otherwise, it goes out to the server and it finds the date and it grabs the year from the date and it puts it there. You may or may not have noticed that, but it said 2016, whereas this is a 2015 book, it says 2015. All right, so we'd want to change that, of course. So if we didn't have JavaScript, but then you have to manually go in and put in the right year. All right, so that's kind of a pain in the butt to do. You can do it, but it's kind of a pain. All right. Here's a block of JavaScript code, and this is very similar to the example we looked at earlier in the last chapter. All right, we're saying if the email address is blank, we say it's required. We say if the second email address is blank, that it's required. Then we're saying if the two emails aren't the same, the second doesn't equal the first. And if the first name is blank, say that. If none of that stuff happens, then submit the form. Now, this might look a little confusing right here. All right? This is basically saying I want to grab whatever is in my text box that's called email address 1, and I want to throw it into what's called a local variable. Then I want to do the same thing whatever is in the second text box. If that confuses you, just please bear with me because we will be going over it again in more depth. What happens to most people when you work on this stuff is eventually the stuff starts making sense. You don't even realize that it starts making sense, but it just does start making sense. All right, when you create your own stuff in JavaScript, and those will be what are called variables and what are called either functions or methods, there are some rules you have to follow. First of all, JavaScript is a case-sensitive language. What's really scary about that is notice in here from that scores 2 where we had this. See how it says entry here? If I'd have come in here and done this instead, I'm going to grab that line and recopy it. If I had done that line and said here entry 2, I don't even get an error. JavaScript creates a brand new variable that's called entry 2, even though I meant it, so I'm going to comment that one out, even though I meant it to be called entry. All right? And if I do this, if I create, let's get rid of that line. If I had said, instead of entry like this, if I'd have said entry, same thing happens. All right? This variable is different than, this one here is different than that one because of the caseness. And JavaScript is a case-sensitive language. Oops. Each JavaScript statement should end with a semicolon. This is one of those places where I gave you the guitar thing before, that sometimes people just leave them off. Oh, I can leave off the semicolon. JavaScript will put it in. And usually it does. But the reason you wouldn't want to do that is most every other programming language will complain the program will blow up if you don't put in the semicolon. JavaScript ignores white space within statements. So in other words, if I put in something like this, if for some reason I was really anal about stuff, and I wanted everything to line up. See that? I can do that if I want to. JavaScript could care less. If you want to split a statement over more than one line, so in other words, what if I wanted to write this? What if I wanted to, in my program that we were looking at before, in this scores 2, instead of writing here, thanks, like this, what if I wanted to literally output here? I wanted to, we'll do it in here. In my JavaScript at the end, I wanted to put in this. This means right on the screen. So I wanted to document dot write, and I wanted to put in, for whatever reason, now is the time for all good people to come to the aid of their party. All right? Well, that's taking up a lot of room. So I could write it as 2 different lines. In other words, I could say, now is the time for all good people, and then say, oops, document dot write to come to the aid of their party. So I could do that. Let's see if that works. All right, I think this one I'm going to want to make a right line, because otherwise it'll appear on the same line and it'll look really ugly. So let's go back to our scores 2, refresh, run it, 44, 55, 66. Now is the time for all good people to come to the end of their party. See, that works just fine. Not a problem. All right? But I can't do this. I can't say, well, I'm just going to stop writing here, and I'm just going to put it over 2 lines like that, because that looks a lot nicer. Now I can see everything on the screen. Some people try to do that, but watch what happens when I do this. All right, I'm going to refresh, run it again, It's giving me an error. So it doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. But if I want this to appear on 2 lines, if the last character here is a backslash. It's right above your enter key. If I put that in, let's see if it takes that. 66, 77, 88. Now is the time. So if I want something to stretch over multiple lines, I can end a line with a forward slash like this. Now, should I do that? That's just a matter of your own opinion. You know, some people don't like to do that. Some people do. You've got to do with what you feel comfortable with. So that's how you can split. All right. JavaScript functions with identifiers. So these are variables that you create. When you create variables, and a variable is just, it's a variable. It's basically a memory location that's going to hold a value. And that value can change while the program's running. But you should get used to, when you create variables in JavaScript, to putting the word var at the beginning. It's just considered better to do it that way. Also notice here it says process entries. Some people are going to write that. This is using what's called camel casing, where that's two words that are stuffed together. You can't put a blank space. So with camel casing, you take what the second word and you capitalize it like this. Other people use it like this, process entries, and they do it like that. Either one of those ways will work. That's what the author showed camel casing here. Sometimes I think the author will, even in this book, use underscores. Use whichever one you're comfortable with, but only use one, because it's so much easier for you to learn. You're creating a standard. And if you create a standard and you stick to it, it's one less thing that you have to worry about as you are learning the language. Okay? Those variables, a variable or a function name or what's called a method name or what's called a class name, they're known as identifiers. So they can only contain letters, numbers, an underscore, or a dollar sign. They can't start with a number, so they can start with a letter or an underscore or a dollar sign. I recommend just using letters. They are case sensitive, and they can't be the same as a reserved word. So I guess they don't show it here, but in your book, I guess it's coming up, on page 59, they do show you the JavaScript reserved words. You should use your own variables, your own stuff. The name should be meaningful. You should be consistent, as I already mentioned. If you're using the underscore, then always use lowercase. All right. JavaScript is made of statements. A statement is a line of code you put into a JavaScript program that ends with a semicolon. White space is you hitting an enter key, or hitting a space bar, or hitting a tab key. If I'm writing JavaScript and I want to comment out a line, let's say I didn't want to print this line, I can go // and then everything to the right of that gets commented out. So that's now a comment. If I want to comment out multiple lines, I can start with a // with an asterisk, and I can end it with an asterisk and a /. So that's how you can comment things out. You typically comment things out because what you should get used to doing is you write a little code and test. Write a little code and test. Write a little code and test. Unfortunately, what most people do when they first start is they write a lot of code, and then they write more code, and then they write more code, and then they test. So something doesn't work and you don't know what, so you start commenting stuff out. I already told you what an identifier was and what camel casing was. So here's some JavaScript code where they have taken and shown you the different ways to comment, and it's in yellow. Okay? I just mentioned to you how to single line comment and how to do what's called a block level comment. My litmus test as far as commenting goes, when people say, should I comment here or should I not comment here? In all seriousness, my test is, if you have to ask, you probably need a comment there. That's how I feel. You may or may not agree with that. All right, here's a bunch of stuff that you're going to end up doing in JavaScript. You've already seen the alert. I showed you that earlier, and you saw the prompt. All right. There's also, among other things, there's a print statement. The print issues a print request for the current page. Let's not worry about print for right now. All right, but let's write ourselves a real simple JavaScript program. All right, so I'm going to come back to our scores 2, this one that we did, and I'm going to save this as, I'm going to call this, save as, and I'm going to call it odd or even.html. And I didn't write odd, I wrote or for some reason. So odd or even.html, okay? This is going to look exactly the same. I'm not going to write that thanks in there, okay? But instead of putting in test scores, I'm going to put in odd or even.js, okay? And I have to create that file. So I'm going to grab our test scores JS here, and I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to save it as odd or even.js. Okay, so there it is. So if I ran this now, my odd or even, it's going to run that file. And I got to fix that, odd or even. I don't know what's my problem here. All right, but I want to write a real simple little JavaScript program in here. All right. All right. So I'm going to first put in here alert. For this program, enter a number. And is it \n or is it br? I don't remember. We'll find out in a minute. And I will tell you if it's odd or even. All right? So ideally, again, I'm writing a little code. I'm saving it. All right, so let's go to our odd or even.html. Run the program. All right, for this program, enter a number. So it should have been a \n there. You'll see why in just a minute. Let's take a bunch of these and close them. I got way too much stuff open here. All right, so this isn't average test scores anymore. This is called odds or evens. All right. So we've got that. That's cool. And here's our odd or even.js. So where it says that, it should be \n. That should put this over 2 lines. That's a new line escape character. Let's try it running it again. All right, for this program, enter a number and I will tell you if it's odd or even. Good. So I wrote a little code and I tested it. Now I'm going to write a little bit more code and I'm going to test it. All right, so I'm going to come into my file that's called odd or even.js, and I'm going to create a variable, and that variable is going to be called number, and I'm going to set it equal to, and it's going to look really ugly, but don't worry about it, Parse Int prompt, enter a whole number, and I'll put in here 6. All right, so I wrote a little bit more code. All right, I wrote a little bit more code, and now I'm going to test it again. So that worked, and that worked. All right, so I could either put in my own number, or I could leave it at 6. Okay, so I put in a little code, tested, put in a little more code, and tested. All right, so now I should have a number, but it might have been, I left it blank or I put in something non-numeric. So if and I'm going to have this called var result equal true. Okay. In fact, I'm going to call this odd. Odd equal true. If number, let's call it even. If number modulo 2 equal 0, even equal true, else even equal false. I'll go back and explain all this in just a second. If even document.write number is an even number. Else, and I'm making this a lot longer than I really wanted to, but it's okay. Otherwise, we're going to say it's an odd number. All right. First of all, let's test it and see if it works. All right. 37. 37 is an odd number. That looks good. Run it again. How about 38? That's an even number. All right. So let's go, and this hasn't changed except I changed the title to odds or evens, and you may have noticed that up here it says odds or evens. All right, that's what that title attribute does. It's right here. I'm saying put a button on my screen. When I click that button, call main, and main is inside of this routine. The name of the button, its ID will be run, its name is run, and what I want written on the button is run program. All right. Then include this odd or even.js because that file is where main is written. So their odd or even.js, again, this will take a minute or two to go through and it may confuse you. It's not supposed to, but this may confuse you. In English, this says put that alert box like we saw on the screen that says for this program, enter a number. Then it's like you hit the enter key and then show this. So the whole thing will say for this program, enter a number, hit enter, and I will tell you if it's odd or even. All right, then it brings up what's called a prompt box that says enter a whole number. And it gives you a default, so if you enter nothing, it'll put 6 in there. And then take that value and try to convert it into a whole number. That's the Parse Int. If it works, it's going to say, okay, if it works, it's going to say, it's going to take that value and put it in a number. If the Parse Int doesn't work, it's going to hold something called isNaN, or I'm sorry, called NaN, which means not a number. We'll do this. I'm going to grab all of this code. I'm trying to, believe it or not, trying to make this not that difficult for you to understand right now. You may not agree with that. So, all right, in English, from the top, that's our alert box. This brings up a prompt box, which is going to ask us to enter a whole number. All right, then we've got a variable. This is known as a Boolean Variable, which means it's true-false. And I just called it even. I'm assuming the number's true. This says if what we put in there was numeric. So if we did put a number in there, so if that number is numeric, then take that number and divide it by 2. And check the remainder. If there is no remainder, it is even. If there is a remainder, the remainder has to be 1. So it's not even. So if this right here, this if even, that's a shortcut. That means you can also write it as if even equal true. So if it's even, write out that the number is an even number. Otherwise, write out that the number is an odd number. All right? Okay, hopefully I didn't make that too difficult for you. I really and truly didn't try to. All right. So the prompt box I showed you, they talk in here about objects and names. For right now, I wouldn't let that bother you. An object has methods, etc., and it's using the window object. I wouldn't worry about that for right now, if I were you. We're going to get into the objects and stuff a lot more in later chapters. All right, I can do a write or I can do a write line. Write means write it. So imagine this. If I told you to write my name, okay, and you wrote here, you wrote Jeff, and your cursor was sitting right there. That's a write. If I said write my name and you did a write line, it would be like you did Jeff, and you hit enter. All right? So there's examples of write and write line. Basically, an object, for lack of better words, is almost anything in the world. People are objects. Cars are objects. And a car object is made up of an engine object and 4 tire objects and door objects, etc. If you write a function inside of an object, it's called a method. So if I had an object called person, the person might be able to eat and drink and sleep, etc. Those would all be methods. The person could have a height and a weight and an eye color and a hair color. Those would be properties. If I create a method, I want to be able to call the method or do what's called invoke the method. Sometimes for a method to do its thing, it needs information. That information that you give to the method is called a parameter. If you notice in here, these are functions. Main doesn't need anything, so it has no parameters. Is NaN needs a parameter, so that's the parameter for it. It'd be like if I come home from work and my daughter has messed up her room, and I say, Chloe, clean the room. And she looks at me and says, what room? Well, there's a difference between saying, Chloe, clean room, your room, and Chloe, clean room. In that case, your room would be a parameter. Again, we're going to work much more with the window object, global object, etc. These 3 much later in the course. Document object you already saw with document.write. Here are numbers. You can have whole numbers or numbers with decimal places. Here are strings. In JavaScript, you can put strings either in single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter. But it must be 2 single quotes, 1 at the beginning and the end, or 2 double quotes, 1 at the beginning and the end. I showed you a Boolean variable, which was true, false. All right, so Java has 3 number types. Basically, they have whole numbers, which are integers, numbers that have decimal places in them, and if it's not numeric, it's called NaN. Capital N for not, a little a for capital N for number. That's what it stands for. All right? Okay, I don't think there's anything else in here. You probably already know most of this stuff. Again, strings in single or double quotes. Empty string is just single quote, or double quote, double quote. The Boolean data type is true, false. The Boolean values are true and false. Here's some common arithmetic operators. You know addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. I already showed you modulo. That's the remainder operator. Remember, I took the number and I said modulo 2. So I said if you divide the number by 2, if it's equal to 0, meaning there's no remainder, that meant it was an even number. This, to say counter plus plus, just so you see it. So if I say in here counter plus plus, that's the same thing as saying counter equal counter plus 1. But it's a lot less typing. If I say, as you probably already guess, if I say counter minus minus, that's the same thing as saying counter equal counter minus 1. That only works to be able to add 1 or decrement by 1. If I want to go and add 5 to a number, I can't say plus plus 5. That won't work. I can say counter equals counter plus 5, or if I want a shortcut, I can say counter plus equal 5. These two mean the same thing. If I want to subtract 5, I can say either counter minus equal 5, or I can say counter equal counter minus 5. So these two mean the same thing. All right? This is what's called the order of precedence. So you do the plus plus and the minus minus before you do multiplication, division, or modulo. You do multiplication, division, and modulo before you do addition and subtraction. To override that, you use parentheses. Should all make sense. A numeric expression is when you're working with numbers or variables that hold numbers. An arithmetic operator is plus, minus, multiply, divide, etc. Modulus we already talked about. We talked about order of precedence. All right. They mentioned the plus equal on the top of page 71. I already showed you what that means. There's plus equals, minus equals, times equals, divide equals, and modulo equals. They all have one. They all work on variables. A variable stores a value that can change or vary as the program executes. As you saw when we looked at our code, when we create variables, we put the word var before them. When you assign a value to a variable, that equal sign means assignment. If I'm being very literal here, most of us read this as even equal true. What it really means is take the value true and assign it to the variable even. That's actually what it means. All right. I already showed you that and that. So again, we talked about what a variable was. I mentioned always use var. I showed you how to assign a value to a variable, and that equals is the assignment statement, sometimes called the assignment operator. And if I say var age equal 21, then the 21 is what's referred to then as a numeric literal. All right. I can use the plus sign to concatenate things, or I can use it for addition. So in other words, I can either say, so I could come in here and say var first name equals Jeff. Var last name equals Scott. Var full name equals first name plus last name. Now, if I do that, that's going to literally say that my name is Jeff Scott with no spaces. If I want there to be a space, then I would say instead var full name equals first name plus double quote space double quote or single quote space single quote plus last name. Then if I do that, then it's going to be equal to Jeff space Scott. All right. But I can also use and say var a, I'll just keep it here, equals 7. Var b equals 10. Var c equals a plus b. And you should know that that's going to give me what? 17. So here I'm using the plus sign as an equal sign. Here I'm using it as what's called a concatenation character. If I've got something that I can use in multiple ways like that, which is what I'm doing, then I'm doing what's called overloading the operator. So this means this can do more than one thing. Just stuff that you're going to hear along the way, okay? The \n I already mentioned to you, that means it's like you hit the enter key. If I want to be able to put a double quote inside of a double quote, I use that. If I want to be able to put a single quote inside of a single quote, I use that. All right, so here's some examples. Concatenate is combining things together. A string literal is what you put in the double quotes or single quotes. An escape sequence, the two you'll use almost exclusively almost exclusively, the only ones you'll use are \n, which means new line, and \t, which means tab. So it's like you hit the enter key, it's like you hit the tab key. All right? Parse int and parse float. I actually showed you a parse int. That says take whatever value we put in there and attempt to convert it into a whole number. So it converts the string that's passed into it to an integer if it can. If it cannot, it gives you NaN. And not only is there a parse int, there's a parse float, which will allow you to look for something with a decimal place in it. All right? So there are some examples. You can look at them as you get time. Here's the calculate miles per gallon program that the author puts in, and there's the code. There's the other one that we've already done. What I'm going to do that fast if we can, I'm not going to save this, but I'm going to grab that MPG, and I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to call it mpg2.html. Okay, this one should go very fast because this is all the code right here. So I'm going to grab all of that code out of there, and I can now get rid of town hall and odd or even and scores. All right, save it, no. And I'm going to paste that in. All right, I'm going to put a few lines in here. Again, I'm going to put in function main. You don't have to call this main, but it pretty much is a standard that people call their first function in a program main. And in some languages, you must do that. Depends on the language. All right, so let's do this, and this, and this, and that. And then we'll end. All right, so this will be called mpg.js. All right, and here I'll want to be calling just like we did before. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and steal that code that we had in there for odd or even. This stuff right here. All right, so I don't need that anymore. Again, I'm going to get used to putting it at the bottom of my program instead of at the top. So, oops. So, again, run program main, but now I want to call mpg2, mpg2.js. So again, I've removed from here all of the JavaScript, but I need to put in a link to my JavaScript file. Let's see if I did it correctly or not. I could have left something out accidentally. So thanks for using it. Start run program. Come on. And it's supposed to call what? mpg2.js. mpg. Oh, it's supposed to call mpg.js. Sorry. So I was having it call a non-existent file. That might be why it didn't work. All right, enter miles driven, 200. Enter gallons used, 10. Boom, our miles per gallon is 20. All right. So as I go through here and do these and do my own stuff in here, I'll try to remember to save this stuff. So that's what you got from the author. And I'm going to put in here JPS because that's stuff I did. So MPG, MPG2, odd or even, scores 2, test scores, and town hall. So these were the two the author provided. All right. So I am finished with Chapter 2. Onward and upward to Chapter 3.